This past week, the trans community and our allies, and more importantly, our accomplices, demonstrated what true strength is. They showed the power in solidarity, in caring. They showed a willingness to fight back and put your skin in the game. And most importantly to me, they showed a love for each other that will always, always outshine hate. And in doing so, it gave us, and it gave me, something that many of us were in sore need of renewal. Hope. A hope for the future, and a hope in each other. As I discussed in further detail in this video that I released last week, anti-transgender, gender-critical TERF Kelly J. Keane-Minshall, otherwise known by her internet alias Posey Parker, not Parker Posey, held an anti-trans rally in Melbourne, Australia on March 18th, 2023. And by the way, I just wish to say this up front, sorry to all of my Australia viewers for screwing up my Australian geography in the last video. I deeply apologize for that. I probably also still mispronounced Melbourne here, but I'm trying my best. I can barely pronounce my own name correctly, alright? Feel free to laugh at me, not with me, on that one. But more importantly, moving on, at Kelly Jean Minshall's so-called Let Women Speak rally, which notably does not let many women speak, such as trans women or women who actually practice actual feminism that is by its nature trans-inclusive, a group of neo-Nazis came in support of her rally, laying naked what was already clear to many who have been paying attention to many gender-critical TERF talking points. That anti-trans bigotry, especially that espoused by those cloaking themselves in the aesthetic of women's rights issues without actually fighting for women's rights issues, as Keane-Minshall does, dovetails and is actually in conjunction with larger fascist and authoritarian movements. As I spoke about in the earlier video, this fascistic rhetoric that is displayed by the neo-Nazis was not new. Yet, these neo-Nazis showing up at this rally were most notable by how blatant their hate-filled rhetoric and symbology was, shouting "Hail Hitler" and having a banner that said "Kill pedo freaks" as they did the Nazi salute. It was a stark display of, again, how anti-trans hate and fascism often come together. This reality made bare, however, was not taken just as a shock, but a moment of realization by many. That the need to stand up against fascism on the front of anti-trans bigotry was greater than ever. And oh boy, did people show up. A few days later, on March 21st, Keane-Minshall held another rally in Hobart, Tasmania in Australia, where she was met by numerous counter-protesters that again outnumbered her own people at her event, including notably this one counter-protester who pushed back against Keane-Minshall's hate, and ultimately allowed Keane-Minshall a moment to reveal herself.
They will use any means necessary, any language necessary, any smears, to stop us being able to speak.
Why do you stand with Nazis, though?
Why don't you go away? Who did? Who did? No, no, no. I'm not a feminist. I'm not a feminist. Right, this girl here.
Go straight down there. Go straight down there.
Go away.
Stand with Nazis.
Where are the Nazis?
When faced with a woman, notably a woman, who did not wholeheartedly agree with Keane-Minshall's anti-trans hate in her little bubble, Keane-Minshall revealed quite starkly that her whole facade that she's just a person standing up for women's rights in the face of gender ideology coming for our women and children came crumbling down. And she announced that she is by no means a feminist.
I'm not a feminist. I'm not a feminist.
Again, not surprising in the least to anyone who's been paying attention to her actual words before this or the words of the gender-critical movement, but it was telling that she no longer cared to even put on the mask when confronted with people who were calling her out on her hate. People who would stand up for real feminism and trans inclusivity. It shows how often much of anti-trans hate and rhetoric and bigotry just in general falls in the face of actual voices of real people who aren't just parroting back their nonsense back at them, but actually standing up with those around them. But that wasn't the best moment, not even by a long shot. Because when Keane-Minshall attempted to continue her rallies in Auckland, New Zealand, more than 1,000 people showed up in opposition to Keane-Minshall and the type of hate that she espouses. Counter-protesters came to the location flooding it and overrunning the gazebo where Parker had been expected to make her speech. The counter-protesters again vastly outnumbered Keen Minshall's numbers, and many of them shouted, "Go home, Posey, go home." Water, paint, and eggs were flung at Keen Minshall and her supporters, and Keen Minshall herself even had tomato juice thrown on her. And the protester who threw the juice on Keen Minshall stated that the juice was meant to symbolize the harm, the real harm, not just tomato juice to the face, the real harm and blood that Parker has caused to the trans community. And this protester said, quote,
"I am so proud I dropped the juice, and I would do it again and again. If I have to go to prison for 1 year, I am more than happy."
And by the way, that is a perfectly great response in the face of fascism and hate. Being willing to show up and fight no matter the consequences, because hate needs to be fought back against. And eventually, Keen Minshall had to be escorted out of the protest by police, and her future rally in Wellington, New Zealand was also cancelled, causing her to leave New Zealand altogether.
Do you think it'd be worse in Wellington?
Yeah,
Yeah. Maybe it's time to
I think so.
say that we
can't have this,
can't
I
do
can't
it.
protect you
No. Okay.
against hundreds and thousands of people.
No. Okay.
And the police were correct. Wellington was much worse for Minshall because while she did not show up, her event that was once going to be a display of hate has turned into a party and celebration for trans people and our accomplices, showing how queers and our allies know how to start a riot, beat fascists, and then turn it into a party, which is all the absolute best response to fascism. Kick it in the ass and then celebrate and delight in each other and our differences and the joy of our humanity. And all I can say to all of that is, hell yeah. I cannot tell you what this series of events has meant to me to see and watch. As many of you know, if you've been following my channel for any length of time, these past few years have seen growing anti-trans hate movements and rhetoric continue to escalate more and more, almost daily. My fellow trans folks and I have had to watch as the hate against our community is continually stoked by those in power trying to use the scapegoat of our deeply misunderstood, disinformed about, and marginalized community to hold on to their power. Using anti-trans bigotry as a political calculus to push for growing authoritarian and fascism in countries worldwide. I've had to watch as men on some of the biggest stages in my country and others call for the literal genocide of people like me. And while I and so many others who have worked even harder than me have worked to be defiant and push back against these hates, it's been very scary. And I say that as a relatively privileged trans person in the grand scheme of things. I live in a relatively safe area, I'm fairly well off, I'm able to pay my bills, and I feel generally secure in this state, even though the United States itself is a very scary place for trans people and seems like it's only one election away from much darker things. I feel that fear and terror, and it is much harder still for my trans siblings who are not out yet, who may be younger than I am, who don't have full autonomy over their ability to do things or stand up for themselves, who may be living in areas that are less safe for them than me, or who maybe sit at an intersection of even more misunderstood identities as well as their transgender one. Be it a racial identity, a religious identity, a class identity, or many of those combined. It's been deeply scary, and while all of us have showed immense strength, especially those who I look up to, many of whom are younger than me, who are showing so much more strength and power by themselves, it has been really scary and hard to watch all of this. So to see a crowd of people, a sea of trans people and our accomplices, and I mean accomplices because those people put their skin in the game, showing up to display not just their desire to stop Minshall's hate campaign, but to show much needed support to the trans community in the face of the larger growing anti-trans sentiment that has been building around the world as a way to push for increasing authoritarian movements, it meant the world. To show that we will not let fascists and Nazis and authoritarians speak unchallenged, and that trans people are not hated, but loved, and cherished, no matter how much those in power try to paint it otherwise. That means a lot. And most importantly, it showed that true power comes from community and solidarity, and that when we have that, we can accomplish anything. To my trans siblings, especially to trans kids out there, see this moment and know that you are not alone. You are part of a community that loves you, cherishes you, and will stand up for you. And I want to repeat that this is what true power looks like. Because in the days since the Auckland rally, I've seen those pretending that they have control, those who side with Kean Minshall and the anti-trans bigotry, begin to panic and double down. On a personal level, I've had my comment section on my other videos and many others flooded with anti-trans discrimination, more so than usual, which is saying something considering I get a decent amount of it daily, as well as conspiracy theories that are meant to downplay the fascist rhetoric or allow those who have fallen into anti-fascist and anti-trans rhetoric to try to resolve their cognitive dissonance so that they don't feel like they're bad people, but that, oh, it's just the neo-Nazis who infiltrated our groups, without actually doing introspection to realize what their rhetorics are actually supporting. As well as more comments attempting to frame things as just the fighting for women's rights, ignoring that these gender-critical TERFs are just a movement by those in power trying to divide the fight for actual women's rights. Women who include both trans and cis people who fight back against control over our bodies and our lives. And by the way, these comments that I see continually cropping up often dovetail with other hates, like this comment, showcasing how anti-trans hate is just one front in numerous bigotries that uphold fascism. But even beyond my comment section, which has clearly probably become the target of some anti-trans message board somewhere, you've also seen folks like J.K. Rowling continue to get more and more blatant in her anti-trans hate. Now quite actively using anti-trans slurs like Tim in her tweets to dehumanize and delegitimize the trans community and trans women's humanity specifically, as well as using her platform to prop up other anti-transgender lies, such as the false rhetoric that trans women are somehow more prone to male violence, which itself is from a misinformed study that uses sex workers as evidence of criminality of trans people, so quite often showcasing the gender-critical movement's hatred for sex workers, as well as how often anti-trans bigotry upholds this idea of the big, strong, authoritarian man needing to come protect the weak, frail woman who needs protection from the dangerous minorities. While also directly showing support for Kelly J. Kean Minshall, who, as we've discussed, is directly supported herself by fascists. Or we can also look at how other rhetoric has escalated elsewhere in the face of this show of solidarity by many with the trans community. And all I can say to all of that is, while it is deeply harmful, hateful, and bigoted, what I see when I really look deeply at it, when I see through the veneer, is people panicking. Because they either can't handle that they've fallen into actual hateful movements, or those who know exactly what they're doing and trying to double down even harder to try to make themselves appear strong. Because they know they actually aren't. Because true power doesn't panic. I look at this video of Kean Minshall being escorted out of the rally, and you can see the fear in her eyes. And I bet you many people, gender-critical TERFs especially, but many people generally probably look at that video and ignore the crowd of people around her and see her fear in her eyes. And I know some will say that we shouldn't relish causing a woman fear. This fear that Kean Minshall has here is but a small sliver of the pain, the real pain, that she has helped to bolster and actively contributed to stoking against the trans community. She and others who use her same rhetorics and tactics and those who wield her movement to uphold their own authoritarianism have led to actual physical and political violence against the trans community. We are in the midst of a genocide attempt. Make no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And yet, while Kean Minshall, because she is ultimately working to uphold authoritarian rhetorics that centralize power in the state, gets to be escorted out, surrounded by police who are there to protect her, trans people every day have to face similar violence, in fact, even more escalating violence, with no protection from authorities at all. Often violence is done by those who are supposed to use their power to protect, but just use it for self-interest or a desire to inflict harm to showcase their supposed strength. And they stoke it not just there, but within communities leading to actual murder and death of trans people believing these awful anti-trans disinformation tactics. Hell, even at this counter-protest, while Keen Minchell just simply got souped to the face and a bit scared as she got escorted out, at least 2 people from the pro-trans protesters were hit by members of Destiny Church who were there in support of Posey. One person who was hit as part of the pro-trans group was even Mara Davidson, who is a co-leader of New Zealand's Green Party. So Keen Minchell gets to walk away with just a little bit of tomato soup in her hair. There are actual trans people and our accomplices who put their bodies on the line. And many, like Keen Minchell, have relished in causing those women, and trans-supportive women, fear and much worse. Hell, we can even see quite literally Keen Minchell relishing in active physical violence being inflicted upon trans-supportive people in this tweet of hers where she celebrated a woman getting choked by Keen Minchell's own security team because the woman was trying to speak up for trans people at Minchell's Melbourne rally. So if anyone's relishing in fear and violence, it's not the trans-supportive counter-protesters. It showcases why asking for respectability in the face of fascism and those calling for violence only ever serves the fascists. Because they have no compunctions about doing the same and yet demand it from us. Well, no, you're a fascist, you're calling for the death and harm of marginalized people. We don't take that lying down with respectability. We throw tomato juice in your face. And I will also say this, that it is always ethical to make a fascist feel unsafe, unwelcome, and unwanted, because they are. And they should feel lucky if it just feels like tomato soup to the face. While I do feel satisfaction at Keen Minchell being scared away, I do not relish in it. I do not wish this is where we have to be. I hate that this is the time that I and many others have to live in where we have to fight these bigotries. But to paraphrase a famous writer, we do not get to choose our time, only what we do with it. So we do what needs to be done, and we fight hate and bigotry. But what I do relish in is the power that my community, not the trans community, but the community of humanity who cares for each other, showed this past week. We didn't show panic, we didn't show fear, we showed strength in each other and with each other and for each other. That, the joy of that is what I relish in. And what we should all relish in. And remember it. Because we're going to continue to need it. Because this isn't over. The solidarity that we showed each other this past week is not the end, but a needed beginning. As I said, those who spread hate in hopes of holding onto power will double down on their violence and rhetoric. We already see rolling neo-Nazis and many others doing so, and I'm sure many more continually will, those with some of the biggest powers in some of the biggest countries, trying to use this moment to prop up the idea of the dangerous, villainous transes trying to hurt the poor, weak women who need to be protected by the strong man, who need you to vote for a strong authoritarian figure to stop them. And that makes them still, if not more, dangerous. But that isn't true strength. True strength doesn't need authoritarians to defend it. We showed what true strength is. And we also need to understand that that strength needs to show up for other fights. The struggle for women's bodily autonomy with things like abortion rights, for example, fighting anti-Semitism, racial hate generally, anti-Muslim hate, and much, much more. Because these are all issues that are not separate but part of the same fight. We are here for each other. And we can win those fights because we've already shown each other that we can do that. That is the hope we need to hold on to from this moment and remember. Remember that love always wins, community always wins. We just need to be willing to show up and fight, not for the fight itself, but for something greater. Each other. Alrighty, interwebs, I just wanted to make a little follow-up video from last week's video because honestly, everything that came out of this week filled me with such hope in the future. It's been a scary time, as I said, but moments like this show me what I already always knew, but put it in stark display for me, that there is hope for the future, that we can build that better world, that Star Trekian future that I always hope for, of a world where we take delight in the differences of others and pursue the best parts of ourselves. Enable each other to pursue the best parts of ourselves. We can do that. We showed that this week. And let's continue showing that. Anyways, to do the YouTube rigmarole, I have a video coming out on Friday that is a fun video about Star Trek. It should be comedic, should be funny. You'll get to laugh at me, not with me. It'll be a good time. And also, it's up for patrons and those who subscribe on Nebula. So if you want to get it early, go subscribe and support me there, because supporting me on Patreon and Nebula does help me pay my bills. This is what I do for a living. So thank you if you can support me there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. I got other videos coming out on this channel, like some bigger ones on more difficult topics beyond Star Trek. But beyond all of that, I just hope you're all taking care of yourselves, and I wish you all a live long and prosper.